Today we're going to be learning how to make a two-color reduction Linocut print. So you'll need a linoleum block, and we're going to flip it over onto the back. And you're going to need your design. Make sure that it's printed in reverse if it has any words, letters, or the emblem has to go in a specific direction. You'll notice on the back I've actually already traced it once, but just to go through it with this video, I'm going to trace it again and make it nice and dark. I can flip it onto my block and place it nice in the center there, and then just gently rub on the surface, and that graphite that I used on the back will transfer then to the block. Once I have it on there, I'm going to take a Sharpie and I'm going to outline it so that when we wash between our two colors, I don't lose any of the detail lines or have to redraw my image. Next step is to take my image and map out how I want to print out my colors. So for my paper color, I want it to be white. So I'm going to write paper color equals white. Then I'm going to decide and look at my colors. Yellow is lighter than red, so I'm going to first write number 1 and carve out all the areas that I want to keep white, which is going to be my background. And then I'm going to ink up and print out yellow because yellow is the lighter color. For step number 2, then I'm going to carve out all the areas that I want to keep yellow, and then I'm going to print my red. Essentially, I'm going to ink up and I'm going to print the red over the top of the yellow areas. So when I look down at my emblem, to go through this again, I'm carving out all the white in the background, and then I'm going to print out all the yellow areas that you see. And then I'm going to carve out all the yellow areas, and I'm going to print the red that's remaining and left over. So it's a multiple 2-layer reduction Linocut print. The next step is to start carving, and in order to carve you need what's called a bench hook. It's just a little hook that hooks onto your desk that you can shove your linoleum block into, and then you're also going to need linoleum gouges. As you can see here, these are the blades that we're going to use for our linoleum block. They come in a V shape and a U shape. Once you have your linoleum block placed inside your bench hook and pressed against it, you can take the smaller gouge and just carve a thin outline around the outline of your image. This will help so that you don't accidentally carve into your image. Then you may start using the larger gouge or the U shape to start clearing away some of the larger areas. Notice my hand position on the gouge. I'm keeping my fingers away from the front of the blade, and I'm pushing the gouge into the bench hook. The idea here is to push the gouge across the top, not necessarily to dig down into the linoleum block. Keep your hands away from the front of the blade. Always be sure to press into the bench hook and not use your fingers out in front to hold the block in place. As you go around the final outer edge, be careful that you don't accidentally carve too deep or rip up the edge of the surface. This will be important later when we make a registration board and we use your block to help us register. You can start feeling the edges of your board to start noticing which ridges need to be carved down and which ones feel like they're down low enough so that you won't roll over them with the ink. Then take one final look to see that your image is raised up enough so that the ink can lay over the top of it. Now it's time to clean up. Every single little scrap needs to make its way to the garbage and not onto the floor. The next step is to make a registration board. In order to do that, you need 2 sheets of paper. One sheet of paper, you're going to take your block and line it up exactly where you want it to print out. Trace around the block, and then mark where the top is and where the bottom is for your block, so you always place it on there the same way. You can write that this is your registration board and then add your name. You place the block on there, and then decide which corner you're going to line up your paper to every single time that you print. Notice I started in the bottom left corner. I'm always going to print from the bottom left and line it up along the side as I print. Then you'll need an ink and brayer, and it's time to print. Take your ink cup and your popsicle stick and just gently lay out a little line of ink. You're going to use your brayer and pick it up every single time in between your roll. If you just try and roll it out, it's not going to get all of the roller. If you also need to, you can add more ink, or if your ink is not sticky enough or slippery enough, you can add just a tiny bit of water. You'll see here that I'm going to put my name on the back of the print, and my ink was pretty dry, so I need to add a little bit of water, and then I'm going to brayer it a whole bunch to mix that water in. Once my ink is mixed, then I can layer it onto my block. Now it's on nice and smooth. Change directions. Make sure you ink up well enough so that there's a nice even layer. If you notice that you accidentally get ink on some of the grooves that are higher up, you can carefully take a gouge tool and carve it back down, or you can take a sheet of paper and just kind of block it out. So ink it up, place it in your registration block, make sure you line it up really carefully, line it up with the corner that you said you were going to line it up to, line it up to the side, press your hands and rub it, then peel it up and you have your first print. Repeat this process so that you have 6 prints that are good quality. You need to make more prints than you actually need for this assignment so that if you accidentally make a mistake when we go to add our second color, you have an opportunity to still meet the requirements, which is going to be 4 completed prints. As you watch me print out my last 4 prints, notice how I'm always taking the block off of the board, re-registering it, and then re-registering the paper every single time the same way and peeling it off. You'll also notice in this one, I started using the paper because I had some ink spots that I couldn't get rid of in my print. You can do it this way if you're tired of carving it out. In this print, I have a few patchy ink spots because my ink was dry, so I'll use it as a draft print for when I do my second color. Now it's time to clean up. Take it to the sink, wash it. You sign your name on your registration board so you don't lose it. Put it with your linoleum block into your art bin. Put your popsicle stick in the garbage and close up the lid on your ink. Take some spray, wipe down the table, make sure all the crumbs are in the garbage, and lastly, wipe down so there's no ink left on the gouge. That completes part 1 of the production Linocut. To start part 2, you want to start cutting away all of the areas that are your first printed color. In my example, I'm carving away all of the areas that I want to keep yellow. Be sure to reference back to your photo if you need to make sure that you get all of the first printed color sections out. Otherwise, you're going to end up printing over the top of them and you'll lose those color sections. Clean up all the linoleum crumbs and start the printing process again. Grab your registration board, your block, and your printing tools. Lay out a bead of ink. Start braiding it. Remember that you need to pick up your brayer every time. Layer the ink on nice and evenly. If you need to, carve away any excess pieces that are still raised up. You can also use the paper method. This will help block out any unwanted printing marks. Then re-register your block onto the registration board, grab one of your yellow prints, lay it on top, and print it just like you did before. Make sure you register it perfectly so that you get a solid print. Complete this process with all 6 of your prints that you originally made. Then you're going to select 4 of them that you're going to turn in for the final grade. An extremely important part of this process is to make sure that you are consistently registering your project. So make sure that you're always taking the board off, putting it back onto the registration board, and then always checking to make sure that you're lining your paper up the exact same way, peeling it off the exact same way. If you don't do this step, you're going to have some frustrations with your registration and you'll have some misalignment. This will impact your grade. The last step again is just to make sure that you clean up your area. You follow the directions from part 1. Wiping down your area using just straight water works great, and using a wet washcloth also makes it really easy to clean up your space. Then it's time to prep and turn in your project. Here are my final 6 prints, so I'm going to select my best 4 that look similar and that show accurate registration. Those are the 2 qualities that I'm looking for when I go to grade this project. So again, looking for accurate registration, and then 4 that create a similar addition set. Once you've selected your 4, now it's time to label them. You'll notice in the middle of your paper, just below your print, you're going to label it as the first edition of 4 prints like a fraction, and then write your name in the bottom right-hand corner. So you'll see here the numbers go up from 1, 2 to the 3rd print, and then last the 4th print, written as a fraction so we know which print edition this is. Then you'll turn them in ascending order from 1st to the 4th print for your grade.